The forest never makes complete silence, not even at midnight. There's always a whisper, a shifting of leaves, something breathing beyond the reach of light. Ethan Cole thought he could handle that. After years as a park ranger, solitude felt like peace. But lately, the peace had teeth. Every night, something brushed against the cabin walls, soft but deliberate, like fingertips searching for seams. What would you do if the quiet started listening back? If the trees began recording you instead? The cameras were supposed to calm him. 6 trail cams mounted around the cabin, feeding him reassurance. But the first night they blinked red, something moved between them. Too tall, too smooth. Shy. The next morning, he watched the footage frame by frame, and somewhere between the stillness of night and the rising sun, his own reflection blinked from outside the window. Morning came, but the forest stayed gray, colorless, as if the light had lost its courage. Ethan dragged himself outside with a thermos and the sharp sting of sleeplessness. He checked the first 2 trail cams, replaying the night's footage on his handheld monitor. Nothing unusual. Swaying branches, fog, small motion blips from deer. But the third camera, the one facing the old path toward the river, had turned itself. It now stared directly at his cabin door. He didn't remember aiming it there. The timestamp glitched, skipping backward several minutes. Then, for a single frozen frame, he saw his own figure. Same jacket, same build, walking toward the lens at 2:17 a.m. when had been asleep on the couch. He froze, staring at the playback until his own reflection flickered on the monitor screen. He spent the rest of the day resetting every camera. Maybe it was wind. Maybe an animal had brushed it. Rational thoughts were easier than facing what the footage suggested. As he worked, the forest pressed closer. Every twig snapped too sharp, every silence stretched too long. By dusk, Ethan's nerves hummed like electric wire. Inside, the cabin's warmth felt foreign, the shadows deeper. He poured a drink and replayed the clips again, focusing on every pixel, searching for distortion. But at the exact moment he leaned closer, the footage jumped, and for one frame a pale hand appeared against the glass behind him. His own window? His heart slammed once, twice. He turned. Nothing. Just the empty woods staring back through the glass. That night, the wind died. The forest fell into an unnatural stillness, the kind that makes you believe something's waiting for you to speak first. Ethan lay on his couch, with the cameras streaming, live on his laptop, 6 feeds glowing faintly. He tried to read, but his eyes kept drifting toward the screens. 1:14 a.m. A flicker. Feed 4 blinked out, then back in. The camera's red indicator light shifted. It now pointed at the cabin window instead of the yard. Then something crossed the view, too close to the lens to identify. A pale blur. He sat upright, heart hammering, the room echoing with its own quiet. Outside, a single knock came from the back wall. Deliberate, hollow, slow. He went outside with the flashlight, pulse pounding, every step crunching the frost-bitten earth louder than it should. The forest stood motionless, trees like frozen sentinels. His breath clouded the air, merging with the faint mist that lingered low. He reached the back wall where the knock had come from. Nothing there but the camera, tilted slightly downward. When he lifted it to straighten the view, the lens caught something in the distance. A shape. Still. Watching him from the tree line, Ethan's mind screamed for logic, for any explanation that didn't involve what his gut already knew. Then, from his radio, still clipped to his belt, came the faint sound of breathing, his own voice whispering his name. Ethan didn't sleep. By dawn, his nerves were raw. He played the audio from the night before, isolating the static, amplifying it. Beneath the noise, he found it, the whisper of breath, sensing perfectly with his own movements. It wasn't playback from the woods. It was a mirror, delayed by seconds. He froze when the radio replayed him muttering, "Who's there?" followed immediately by a second voice repeating the same words in a lower tone. The echo had texture, breath, intent. He stared out the window toward the tree line, where pale fog burned off in patches of early sun. Something was learning him, not watching, studying. Later that day, Ethan called Sheriff Mercer, trying to sound casual. He described what he'd seen, or thought he'd seen, and the sheriff's pause on the other end was longer than comfort allowed. "Probably kids," Mercer said, though no one lived within miles. "Could be hunters." The word hunters felt wrong. Ethan hung up before he could explain the radio voice. He spent the afternoon checking batteries, replacing memory cards, trying to ground himself in procedure. But as dusk fell, one thought gnawed at him. What if the cameras weren't showing him the woods, but showing the woods him? At nightfall, rain arrived in thin, constant sheets, drumming on the tin roof. Ethan monitored the live feeds, relieved to see nothing moving beyond the flicker of raindrops. At 2:43 a.m., one feed blinked, then showed him stepping outside with his flashlight, except he hadn't moved. He was still sitting there, eyes wide, watching himself appear on the screen. His double stood in the rain, face hidden by the beam of light reflecting off the lens. Then it turned, looked directly into the camera, and the video cut to black. Ethan sat frozen, hearing his own recorded voice whisper, "Don't come outside." He bolted the door, heart pounding. Every rational part of him screamed for sleep, for a reset. But curiosity was a disease that had already taken hold. He replayed the feed frame by frame. When the doppelganger's face finally came into view, the breath left his lungs. It wasn't identical. It was almost him, like a photo reprinted too many times. Edges soft, eyes wrong, mouth slightly misaligned. The copy's lips moved, but no sound came through the speakers. Ethan leaned closer, desperate to catch a word. Then, with impossible timing, a knock echoed from the front door, the same rhythm, 3 slow knocks, that the figure's lips had just formed. He waited by the door, flashlight shaking in his grip. The knocks didn't return. The forest outside felt sentient, listening, waiting for him to make the next move. He opened the door a crack, light spilling across the wet porch. Empty. Just rain dripping from the eaves. But when he looked down, he saw them. Footprints, bare and human, leading away from the porch into the darkness, each one perfectly aligned with his own boot prints from the day before. He followed them only a few steps before realizing they didn't start at the house. They ended there. 3 nights passed without sleep. Ethan's face looked hollow, his hands shaking from caffeine and adrenaline. Every evening, he sensed the trail cams. Every morning, he found something new. The figure appearing in different spots, sometimes motionless for hours, sometimes half-turned toward the cabin. What unnerved him most wasn't movement, but pattern. Each appearance was slightly closer, always at the same time. 3:11 a.m., he compared timestamps, angles, distances, until a truth formed that logic couldn't erase. The thing wasn't wandering. It was approaching, with purpose, and by the latest footage, it was only 20 feet from his porch. By the 4th night, even the forest seemed to be holding its breath. Ethan sat with headphones on, listening to every creak of the floorboards. Then, one by one, the cameras went dark, not offline, but deliberately turned off, as if something had pressed each button in order. Feed 1. Gone. Feed 2. Static. Feed 3 froze on a single image. A blurred, elongated face near the lens. Ethan replayed it again and again, zooming closer until pixels disintegrated into noise. Then, through the distortion, 2 pale eyes blinked, slow, deliberate, aware. He pulled the headphones off, heart slamming against his ribs, as a soft creak echoed behind him. He turned slowly, flashlight trembling in his grip, nothing but the sound of the wind brushing pine needles. But the cabin didn't feel empty. The air carried a charge, a faint vibration that buzzed against his skin. He lifted the flashlight toward the window, and his reflection stared back. Only it wasn't sensed. When he blinked, it didn't. When he leaned forward, it stayed still. The radio beside him crackled faintly, whispering static that formed into his own voice. "Don't look away." He froze, staring into his reflection's unmoving eyes, realizing for the first time that whatever was watching him had learned how to wear his face. The next morning, Mara arrived. She had driven 6 hours from Portland after Ethan's panicked voicemail, her voice shaking when she called out his name from the porch. He looked like a ghost, unshaven, pale, eyes sunk deep into sleepless sockets. She tried to laugh it off at first, thinking isolation had finally broken him. But then he showed her the footage. She leaned close to the screen, watching frame by frame as the figure approached the cabin, its movements mechanical, yet unmistakably human. When the final clip played, showing the figure standing inches from the door, she turned to Ethan with a single word caught in her throat. "When?" That night, Mara insisted they leave, but Ethan refused. "I need to know what it wants," he said, his voice steady but eyes unfocused. They stayed up together, watching the feeds. At exactly 3:11 a.m., every motion sensor blinked red. The figure appeared again, closer than ever, standing at the window, perfectly still. Then, slowly, it lifted its hand and pressed it against the glass. Mara screamed, but Ethan didn't move. He stared, mesmerized as his own hand, against his will, rose and met it. For a heartbeat, their palms aligned through the glass, flesh to reflection, before the screen went black. Morning light cut through the fog like dull knives. Mara packed her things, muttering that Ethan needed sleep, a doctor, something human. But before she could leave, an old pickup rumbled up the dirt road. From it stepped old man Kip, stooped, bearded, eyes the color of weathered steel. He said little, just asked, "You've been setting eyes where they don't belong, boy." His words carried no accusation, only certainty. When Ethan nodded, Kip sighed. "Then it's looking back now. That's how it starts." The woods behind him swayed, though there was no wind, every trunk leaning subtly toward the cabin, as if listening. Kip refused to step inside. "Places remember things," he said, his gaze fixed on the tree line. He told them about the old families who lived here a century ago, loggers who vanished one winter after claiming the forest. Moved. Their stories spoke of watchers, shapes that mirrored movements, learning from those they saw, until the originals simply stopped returning home. Ethan felt the weight of every word. "They mimic," Kip rasped. "Not to kill, but to replace. You'll think it's you until it isn't." He glanced toward the cabin windows where faint reflections stirred. "Don't let it see you sleep." After Kip left, the air thickened, dense as syrup. Mara urged Ethan to pack and go, but his obsession anchored him. "If it can copy me, it can be caught," he whispered. He rewired the trail cams, setting them to motion trigger at shorter intervals. As dusk fell, Mara stood at the window watching the forest shift into deeper blue. "What if he's right?" she murmured. "What if it's not trying to hurt you? Just trying to be you?" Ethan didn't answer. He stared at the feed monitors where his reflection flickered between frames, sometimes blinking out of sync. At midnight, the cameras triggered again. One feed showed the figure crouched at the riverbank, washing its hands in the dark water, copying Ethan's movements from that morning. Another feed caught it standing beside Kip's truck, head tilted, hand trailing along the paint as if memorizing the shape. Mara covered her mouth, whispering, "It's learning faster." Ethan's voice cracked as he said, "No, it's practicing." The figure stopped, turned its head toward the camera, and for the first time, smiled. Not wide, not monstrous, but the same quiet half-smile Ethan used when pretending everything was fine. The final warning came just before dawn. The last camera feed, the one pointed at the cabin door, flickered to life. On screen, Ethan stood outside, or something wearing him did. The doppelganger lifted its hand, pressed it to the lens, and whispered something that didn't record. Then the power cut out, every screen dying at once. Silence swallowed the room. In the darkness, Ethan whispered to Mara, "It's not out there anymore." The words trembled with realization. "It's in here." The faint sound of boots on the floorboards answered him. Identical rhythm, identical rhythm. The generator failed before sunrise. The cabin sank into silence so complete that Ethan could hear his own pulse. He and Mara lit candles, the flicker making the shadows breathe. Every creak of timber felt deliberate now, like the house itself had learned rhythm. Mara sat by the door, clutching her phone, but there was no signal. When she asked what I'd do if it came inside, Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the window, not in fear, but in recognition. "It's already been in here," he whispered. "Every night we watched it, it was watching back, from this side." The candlelight trembled, as if something exhaled close by. At 3:11 a.m., the familiar timestamp, the doorknob began to turn. Slow. Clockwise. Stopped. Then again counterclockwise. Ethan raised his flashlight, heart slamming, but said nothing. The sound of breathing drifted through the thin wood. Steady, patient. Mara whispered his name, but he held a finger to his lips. The door clicked open an inch, revealing nothing but cold air and darkness. The flashlight flickered once and died. When it came back, the door was fully open. Ethan stepped forward, scanning the threshold, but the only thing outside was his own set of wet footprints leading into the house. They barricaded the door with the couch. Mara begged him to leave, but Ethan's stare never broke from the dark window. "If we run, it follows," he said softly. "It always finds me again." The radio on the shelf crackled to life, whispering static. Then, under the noise, a voice, his own, said, "Let me in." Mara screamed, knocking the radio to the floor, but it kept speaking, looping the same plea in perfect imitation of his tone, until both voices overlapped. "One from Thumb." Radio, one from outside, perfectly synchronized. Ethan's hand shook. He whispered, "It doesn't need permission." The figure came just before dawn. It stood in the yard, still as stone, rain running down its face, Ethan's face. Through the window, Mara saw it raise a hand and wave slowly, almost kindly. Then it walked toward the door, each step echoing with heavy, deliberate rhythm. Ethan grabbed Mara's wrist. "Don't move," he whispered. The footsteps stopped just outside. For a long, unbearable minute, silence ruled. Then came a knock, gentle, almost polite. 3 taps. Then a 4th. And from the kitchen, behind them, another knock answered, from inside. Mara turned first. What she saw in the kitchen wasn't the creature. It was Ethan, standing by the counter, expression calm, whispering her name. But the real Ethan was still beside her. The copy smiled faintly, identical down to the scar on his chin. Then every candle in the cabin blew out. In the flash of darkness, 2 voices spoke at once. "Run." She stumbled toward the door, but Ethan didn't follow. When she looked back, both men stood face to face, mirror images breathing in perfect unison. One whispered, "You shouldn't have watched." The next second, the lights surged back, and only one Ethan remained. The dawn brought hollow calm. Mara was gone, her truck tracks vanishing into fog. Ethan told himself she was safe. He had to believe someone still was. He spent the morning wiring every camera to one feed, sealing the doors, setting the generator humming again. "It wants the lens," he muttered. "So I'll give it one." Each click of a connector felt like a prayer. When he looked at the monitors, his own face blinked from different angles, the cameras reflecting him in triplicate. Then one of the reflections smiled first. He tested the feed loop, speaking into his camera. "You hear me?" The delay returned his own voice half a second late. Then another voice, identical but lower, answered. "I do." The monitor image blinked, and now two Ethans filled the frame, one breathing faster than the other. The generator faltered. The lights pulsed once. The copy leaned closer to its camera until the pixels broke apart, whispering, "Trade places." Ethan yanked the plug, the screens dying to black. But the reflection on the glass door kept moving. He grabbed his rifle. Habit, not hope, and stepped onto the porch. The forest was silent, but wrong. The sound vacuumed away. Trail cam flashes popped one by one in the distance, triggered by movement he couldn't see. Then a beam of light turned toward him. His own flashlight, lying 50 yards away, now lifting as if held by unseen hands. It tilted, found him, and stayed fixed on his chest, his breath fogged white. "Come on then," he said, and walked into the light. The forest swallowed him whole. Camera flashes burst like lightning between trees, capturing frames he couldn't see. Somewhere ahead, branches cracked in sync with his steps. He turned his camera on record, whispering, "Show yourself." The lens flickered, and his own voice from behind repeated the phrase. He spun. Another Ethan stood there, face calm, eyes pale, holding a camera of his own. Both raised their devices at once. The woods flared white as two shutters clicked in perfect harmony. When the flash faded, only one camera lay in the moss. Lens cracked. Ethan stumbled back toward the cabin, but every direction looked the same. Identical paths, identical trees. The radio on his belt crackled. Recording complete. His own voice again. Then, faintly, another. "Maras. Ethan. You didn't make it out." His knees gave way. The forest around him shimmered like heat, and shapes began to step from the fog, copies wearing his face. Dozens, each blinking in perfect rhythm. Somewhere, his real camera kept filming, alone. Dawn seeped into the forest like weak firelight through glass. Ethan stumbled through the mist, lungs aching, boots sinking in mud. Behind him, the woods shifted, branches clicking softly, as if marking time. He followed the faint rumble of a road he hadn't seen in days, clutching his camera to his chest like a heartbeat. Each breath came with the same thought. Keep moving. The air brightened by degrees until he saw the clearing and the faint shimmer of asphalt ahead. He didn't look back. The forest no longer felt like something that could be turned away from. It felt alive, watching, learning how to breathe without him. He reached his truck where it sat half hidden beneath dripping branches, keys still in the ignition. For the first time in weeks, the silence behind him didn't sound like pursuit. It sounded like waiting. The engine coughed, caught, and the cabin filled with the smell of oil and cold air. As the wheels found the road, Ethan felt the vibration of escape beneath him, steady and real. But when he glanced into the rearview mirror, he saw a figure at the tree line, his own shape, still and patient, framed in fog. He blinked once, and it was gone. He drove for hours, until the forest was just a blur in his memory, and the highway signs pointed toward the coast. That night, in a roadside motel that smelled of salt and bleach, he set the camera on the table and powered it up one last time. Static filled the screen. Then the cabin appeared, quiet, untouched. He watched himself moving through the empty rooms, though he hadn't been there. Every motion precise, familiar, but drained of thought. The version of him on screen paused by the window, lifted its hand and pressed its palm to the glass as if to say goodbye. The footage kept looping, each replay more distorted than the last, until the figure on screen turned and looked straight into the camera. Ethan leaned closer, breath shallow. The image smiled faintly, the same quiet half-smile he'd once used to reassure Mara. Then it turned away and walked out of frame. The cabin lights flickered in the background, one by one, before everything faded to black. For a moment, the reflection of his own face appeared over the dark screen, perfectly aligned with the last frame. He closed the laptop and whispered, "You can have it." At sunrise, Ethan left the laptop on the motel desk, still humming softly. He stepped into the pale coastal air, the wind smelling of rain and ocean. The horizon glowed gold, vast and clean, the kind of light that makes you believe in second chances. As he walked toward his truck, he didn't look back, but the camera he left behind did. The screen flickered once, showing the empty cabin, then the motel room itself. Ethan's reflection appeared briefly in its dark surface, smiling faintly before fading into static. The world kept moving. The forest kept watching.